Good evening, everybody. Welcome to this talk. Thanks for attending. And well, I'm trying to give an overview of the state of physics, focusing on the issue of US and European culture. And let me begin. If you're a fan of strings, loop, supersymmetry, or multiverses, you will probably upset rather than delighted, or if you even are actively involved in abolishing principle of science, scientific methodology in the absence of empirical data. I think this is the definition of unscientific science. And I guess I'm not alone in this point of view. Roger Penrose has criticized modern theory development, and in a very good recent book, Sabine Hossenfelder criticized the modern theories, particularly the issues of beauty or naturalness, which are hollow concepts. And but if you're honest, the sickness of physics did not start yesterday. So what I propose here is to take a sober historical look, and if you again look at the other recent development of physics, if you believe that the standard model works fine and we just need some clues from new experiments, and maybe we need to build the future circular collider, which will bring us then to a new theory, you will probably not like the talk either, because what I think is that all this is based on more or less an unintelligible mess of free parameters called the standard model. And I'm going to argue that indeed, if you look at history, physics has reached its peak intelligence around 1930, and that theoretical physics is declining since then, by and large caused by a superficial thinking rooted in US scientific tradition. And if you compare the people who have founded modern science, we have to be honest, these were individual thinkers from Europe, from Newton to Einstein, and you just cannot compare the achievements of these modern guys to those accomplishments. European tradition was founded on the wish of understanding nature in its inmost folds, and basically modern theories are, well, let's get things to work. And well, this is what I'm trying to propose. By the way, there are always people who want to purposefully and sometimes viciously misunderstand me, and this has nothing to do with the so-called German physics by some right-wing ideologists who were basically just too dumb to understand Einstein's theories back in the 1920s and 30s. It is rather the attitude of Albert Einstein, I think, who symbolizes the European research tradition with its basic principles in search for simplicity. And well, we all know that Einstein had to leave Germany in 1933 instead of the bawling crowds of fanatized students going to the German university cities. In America, he met friendly, cooperative people who welcomed him with openness and open arms. So let's talk about the strength of the United States of America. And for sure, these were a collection of smart, brave, courageous, creative people. And that's how they became a world power, because they created back then a peaceful and cooperative society that also brought science, in particular applied science, to new heights. So Also, if you look at the memoirs of Werner Heisenberg, for instance, also Heisenberg was impressed. The New World impressed me from the first day. The free, straightforward activity of the young people, their spontaneous hospitality and helpfulness, the cheerful optimism that emanated from them all made me feel as if all burdens had been lifted from my shoulders. And these are the strong points. And but on the other hand, it's also very interesting that Einstein recounted a conversation with an American colleague, and he was telling about the problems in Europe were discussed between waves and particles, and the European physicists were desperate about not knowing how to interpret these mysterious experiments. And then his counterpart just retorted, "What's the problem? We call it wavicle." Okay, and I think this is the way physics fundamental problems are dealt with to this day, and that's a problem. It's maybe best exemplified if we compare the Solvay 1927 conference to another conference 20 years later in Shelter Island. And physics back then already was in a crisis, because maybe it had become too difficult, but there were a lot of unsolved problems on the table. And of course, it's not the fault of American culture that these problems were there. It's just the way of thinking, which is very different. Everyone knows that after this crisis of fundamental physics, we had the political catastrophe in Germany. Basically, all the intelligence in first approximation emigrated to the United States, but they could not re-establish the European scientific culture. For instance, Einstein was superficially admired in Princeton, but he was not an authority anymore, and the same holds for people like Dirac, Niels Bohr, or Schrödinger. So, and of course, the watershed event that really changed science was the development of the atomic bomb. And I think that this process from getting out of the ivory tower of how to understand nature to seizing world power with the most terrible weapon was a development theoretical physics never really recovered from. And if you think about physics has really changed into another science. It has the same name, but it's not the same thing before 1930 and after 1945. And incidentally, the guys who built the bomb were considered the leading theoretical physicists, although there was no particular intellectual challenge in doing that. And but they were just the leaders. And as I said, after the war, theoretical physics kind of restarted with the Shelter Island Conference. And it is there where the superficial patching up of fundamental problems started. The so-called theory of electrodynamics, quantum electrodynamics, was pushed forward. And now everybody says quantum electrodynamics is fantastic and is so precisely tested, but thanks to a Spanish researcher, Oliver Conser, it's really incredible if you look at the history of this quantum electrodynamics, what's happened there. And I think all these claims of he mentions incredible things, incredible scandals, even of tinkering data. So I think all these claims of the fantastic agreement between theory and experiment really evaporate in the light of history. And I'm sorry to say, but quantum electrodynamics is a bunch of with wishful thinking that sweeps under the rug the basic problems. And let's again be honest, people have said this. I mean, Wolfgang Pauli said, we will be considered the generation of physicists that left those fundamental problems unsolved, and he intended the infinities, the infinite amount of energy contained in the electric field of a single electron. And even more to the point, maybe Paul Dirac, who commented, who by the way coined the term the so-called quantum electrodynamics. He said, this is just not sensible mathematics. Sensible mathematics involves neglecting a quantity when it turns out to be small, not neglecting it just because it is infinitely great and you don't want it. So, well, I think this is marks the beginning of the superficial dealing with fundamental problems, of which we have a couple of unsolved problems, and it starts the attitude that we can solve everything. We just need to build big machines. Every problem can be resolved with brute force, with many people working on that, with a lot of funding and a lot of new accelerators. And but this is not how science works. It does not work by big science or even think big. It works by thinking deeply, and thinking was not on the agenda, really, not in the style of the European founding forces of science. So yeah, this is, after all, I'm of course accelerating here, going fast through the history of physics, but how this mess of particle was created in the accelerators, and even postulates such as quarks by Gell-Mann did not really simplify to a satisfactory point of view. And at the same time, we have a very well, arrogant attitude. We almost understand everything, while a lot of fundamental problems are actually unsolved. Just if you think about the fine structure constant is not calculated. There is no reason, no one who could explain the electron-proton mass ratio, and so on and so on. We are just producing new unexplained parameters in today's physics. And so I'm already concluding a little bit. I think the European, I mean, this is not, to be clear, this is not about nationality. It's about thinking traditions. And of course there are many exceptions, but the style of thinking is clearly distinguishable. And in Europe there was the search for fundamental questions, whereas in America the application and technology dominated. They were incredible in doing huge projects like the moon landing or the atomic bombs. There's certainly a dominance of the US culture here. But as if you go to fundamental physics, Europe must try to understand, and the modern theories are describing. Europe was based on philosophy. Physics is a successful enterprise of philosophy guided by evidence, and in America it was useful, but philosophy was also dismissed. And in Europe we had individual thinkers, and in the post-war culture, large communities. There were Gedankenexperiment versus big science, and I observe also a certain humbleness if you read the biographies of people like Einstein or Schrödinger or Dirac versus the, well, think big visions of 26 dimensions which promise to explain everything. And one thing that has been lost completely is the realization that good physics is simple, and we're just model fitting with arbitrary many parameters today. And another thing that has been lost is also real truth thinking. Success is measured in Nobel Prizes, and this is not what science is about. You can find some of my thoughts here on simplicity, where I try to gather some historical evidence for the fact that the peak explanation of physics was around 1930, and these thoughts are contained in my recent book, which is called Einstein's Nightmare. Hopefully it will be available in an English version soon. And well, other writings a little bit with the same ideas are my book Bankrupting Physics, which is an English edition of this one, the Science Book of the Year, and this is my YouTube channel, Unpsychosurreal Physics. I hope you enjoyed the talk, and I'm happy to answer any question. Thank you.
Thank you for your contribution. Maybe you can stop sharing your presentation. That makes communication a bit easier. And I'm pretty sure there are numerous comments and questions. Elena Shah the first. And please be short. Yeah. We just have 5 minutes.
Sorry. Just a couple of comments also relating to my presentation yesterday on the difficulties how to read Heisenberg's work. And like, just for myself here, Heisenberg continues also himself on the question being critical about the pragmatic view of interpreting physics in the US. And I was just wondering, I came a bit late, how aware are you of the work of David Kaiser and this question about the counterculture in the US and the answering of to kind of a physics that is guided around shut up and contemplate. And he has done also research on textbooks in physics in German and in the US.
Yeah, probably not with that particular detail, but I appreciate very much. I mean, of course, everyone is familiar with this philosophy of shut up and calculate, or shut up and maybe get data. Heisenberg is an interesting figure. I left him a little bit out because indeed he is ambiguous. I would count him in part as a part of the European tradition, but actually he very much adapted in his post-war activities to the new culture, so to speak. And I have, by the way, made a video on Heisenberg. He has also a very interesting role with the atomic bomb, and yeah, it's any research in that direction is welcome. Yeah, thank you.
Matei Climescu.
Right. Thank you very much for your very nice presentation. I'm very curious to hear where you think this tendency in America comes from. So why are the Americans so, I guess, application focused? Because the way I see it is America is in the end an offshoot of the British, and the British themselves all have produced some of the greatest scientists, with many of which you've quoted: Newton, Maxwell, Dirac, and so on. While the Americans are, I mean, you could say a more vulgar version of the British in a way. Where do you think this comes from?
Yeah, very interesting comment. Well, let me again repeat. This is not about nationality. We're talking about culture of thinking, and there are indeed parallels between the British Empire and the American Empire. But certainly, the U.S. culture does not only stem from the British, also Germany and France and Italy and Enrico Fermi, people like that. But so I think the American culture was founded by European immigrants, but I think it was a selection of people. And it is clear that if you emigrated at the end of the 19th century to America, you were above average, probably intelligent, courageous, interested in getting things done, but not necessarily a philosophical thinker, never moving out of his city like Immanuel Kant or Louis Victor de Broglie, who just had the time to sit for 10 years there and ponder very deeply about a fundamental problem. So I think the just the people were of a different kind. We have to recognize this is I think this is visible to this day and has transformed into what is called Western culture today. And will be also with the consequence that we observe a century-long backslash with a slight decline of Western culture, of superficial thinking in many areas. That's, I think, part of the problems of the actual civilization we face.
Okay, thank you so much. We are at the end of this session and also at the end of the history of physics part of this conference. I would like to thank all participants in all sessions. I think that was overall a very productive and successful conference, and I hope to see all of you in 2 years' times, hopefully in a regular conference where we can meet face-to-face and have some conversations after the talks as well, which I think is one of the great benefits of these conferences. Take care, stay
I hope that
safe,
too,
and
very
all the
much.
best. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much.